Week 3 fantasy football is right around the corner, and that means we've got to set our lineups here. So in this episode, I'll be dropping 5 names at the running back position that I think have a pretty good shot to be hits in our lineups this week. Of course, everyone's situation is different though, so I want you guys to let me know your tough lineup decisions down in the comment section below. And of course, if you see someone else's question down there that you think you have a good feel for, feel free to chime in on the conversation, and I'll get back to as many of you as I possibly can and help you smash your leagues this week. Of course, turn that bell on and click that subscribe button if you're new around here. The quicker you get on the lineup episode videos and all of our other content, the faster you can drop your questions and the better chance I have of getting back to you all. So make sure to take advantage of that stuff, you guys. Remember, help each other out as well. And let's dive into my 5 must-start running backs here for Week 3. Alrighty, here we go. So as I did last week, I'm going to do a really quick recap of our Week 2 picks. Had a bit of a rougher week. We only went 3 of 5 in Week 2. The 2 misses we had were, of course, Cordarrelle Patterson right here. Had 10 rushing attempts, but didn't really get too much factored into the receiving game. Didn't have any receptions in that contest. And of course, the game script got really out of hand. I was actually quite disappointed to see him not have receiving work, considering the fact that he is a very dynamic weapon. But of course, he had 10 rushes, almost only 41 yards, so 4.1 yards per carry. And then Kareem Hunt was our other miss. We went from last week seeing him get the premium touches in the Browns backfield, and then all 3 of the touchdowns bounced Nick Chubb's direction here for Week 2. So that one ended up not working out so hot for us. But CPAT, we're going back at it. We're taking another swing at the bat here for Week 3 fantasy football. This time around, taking on what I expect to be a much more favorable game script against the Atlanta Falcons. Against the Seattle Seahawks. Man, that was rough there. Cordarrelle Patterson, of course, plays for the Atlanta Falcons. I was reading my notes here because what I did want to tell you guys was I'm expecting a much better game script here for the Falcons, who are 1-point underdogs in this matchup. Very surprising to me. Personally, I would actually take this is kind of a pick'em game here almost. I would take the Falcons to maybe win this game outright. So it is a very closely contested game. They were 10-point underdogs last week against the Rams, and the reason, like I said, we expected him to be, or at least I expected him to be a startable player last week, was because I expected more receiving game involvement here, and that wasn't the case for him. But what should be a much more competitive contest here, I think things will work out. Like I said, I think the Falcons win this football game in those touches. Hopefully we can get some more efficient work going here. We did see in the first 2 matchups of the season for the Seahawks, opposing running backs have very good efficiency numbers here. Like I said, he had 10 rushes for 41 yards last week against the Rams at 4.1 yards per carry. Jeff Wilson Jr. on 18 touches last week ended up total with his receiving involvement going over 100 scrimmage yards, had 4.7 yards per carry, so some even better efficiency there, over half a yard per carry more. And then in Week 1, Javonte Williams, the lead back for the Denver Broncos, had 6.1 yards per carry against the Seattle defense. So only 1 target last week. He had a 59% snap share in Week 2, 65% in Week 1. So he did have a little bit of a 6% fall off there, but I am still expecting him to see some goal line opportunities. We did see Tyler Algier get factored into things here in Week 2, but he ran the ball 10 times for 30 yards at just 3 yards per carry. So I don't think he necessarily earned himself any more touches in the backfield last week. CPAT was still the more impressive player. CPAT's still the guy I expect to get the nod in the goal line, and I do think there's a better chance for them to get those looks this week. And then, of course, obviously, please, Arthur Smith, get your head out of your ass and give Cordarrelle Patterson and Kyle Pitts some more opportunities in the passing game here for Week 3 action. Josh Jacobs is the next bubble player. I should mention, these are players here that all made my top 24 rankings for the running back position. The landscape of the fantasy running back spot, though, has drastically changed from Week 1. I talked about how it looked so good, and we are just sliding down a hill here with the top extremely separating themselves from the bottom here, and we're just hoping for the best for these lower end RB2 players, which I try to pick some fringe lineup names for you guys, for those of you in a pinch, so that you can ultimately hopefully have some positive outlooks here and reasons to be excited about your lineups for this week. So Josh Jacobs this week taking on the Tennessee Titans on the road. The Raiders are 1-point favorites, so another very close contest here. This is a do-or-die desperation game for both of these teams, entering in 0-2 into this contest, and I think the Raiders have to get back to the basics here. They did run the football a bit more in week 2 than they did in week 1. We saw some success here with Josh Jacobs having a 72% snap share in that game. That was plus 12% from his 60% snap share in week 1. They had control of this football game. They really blew it. They choked this football game late. I believe it was a 23-0 lead at one point in this game. And then we ultimately saw the Cardinals kind of storm back here and win that game. So I think that positive game script is ultimately the reason for that positive plus 12 number in terms of snap share. If you're leading the football game, front running late in the contest, you're going to have more opportunities and options to run the football late in the game and get your running back on the field. But man, he needs more touches. He needs more opportunities to get the job done. And this Tennessee Titans defense is one that has allowed opposing running backs to be very efficient. James Cook ate him up in garbage time on Monday Night Football this week, averaging over 4.5 yards per carry, nearly 5 yards per touch there. And Saquon Barkley absolutely cooked them for over 9 yards per carry in week 1. So Josh Jacobs is not nearly as explosive as either of those two players, but for a guy who tends to be below par in terms of his average yards per rush, that type of a matchup where you're seeing other players have success here is positive for me, especially, like I said, a game where this team needs to be balanced. They need to not be overly reliant on one side or one phase of the game here in terms of the rushing and passing offenses. They need to merge. They need to find some sort of, alignment between these two things here. And for a guy who had 20 touches for 81 total yards this past week, this being Josh Jacobs against the Cardinals, I'm hoping he can get similar volume here in week 3, have some increased efficiency, maybe have over 100 yards from scrimmage. A touchdown would be great as well. He has had 0 touchdowns on the season so far, but he really just needs a goal line opportunity. He's shown us that to this point, he is their true lead, number 1 rushing back for this offense. So I think this could turn into a top 24 finish for Jacobs this week. David Montgomery is my third must-start running back for the week, taking on the Houston Texans. Lo and behold, Chicago is actually 3-point favorites in this game. So again, another positive game script we're seeing for a fantasy football running back. These things are very, very important because they don't always play out like the spread suggests here, but game script matters a ton. If your team is falling behind late in games, like we saw CPAT have last week, they're not going to be able to continue running the football, and they're going to have to turn the direction elsewhere. So for Montgomery here in week 3 against Houston, he's coming off a game where he looked phenomenal against the Packers in week 2. He was right back on to 80% of the team's offensive snap shares heading his direction. We saw that number dip in week 1 in favor of Khalil Herbert a little bit, but then Herbert necessarily didn't have the same amount of usage and on-field presence in week 2. So again, Montgomery looked absolutely great in that game, in a bad game script as well. They're really trying to protect Justin Fields early in the season in this offense and really get a supporting run game going here and other functions of this offense off the ground so that he doesn't necessarily have to carry the load too much. 15 rushes, a $122, over 8 yards per carry. Still no touchdowns on the season, but this is a game for the first time this season where the Bears do not have an extreme talent deficit on the roster. You could see him start to get that first, goal line work of the year, and maybe he punches one in for 6 here in a matchup again against the Texans, where I definitely think that's a strong possibility. So I'm liking David Montgomery's ceiling and floor this week. I think the Bears continue to lean on him heavily. CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, taking on the Indianapolis Colts in this week's matchup. CEH has been surprisingly dynamic to this point in the year, especially in PPR formats. No touchdowns last week. He had 2 through the air in the red zone. They weren't, typical goal line carries or anything of that nature. That's still not something super factored into his weekly outlook here. But this looks more and more like a running back, too, that may not be super touchdown dependent here. We've seen him do fantastic things in the passing game each of the first 2 weeks of this season. And like I said, if he continues to get this much work and be this effective with the ball in his hands in space, he runs hard too. He's not the biggest guy in the world. He's not going to run guys over, but he does keep those legs churning through the end of runs, and he does make his presence felt on the football field. So the main thing I wanted to discuss here is that you've got a Colts defense. I went back and looked at the first 2 weeks of the year, the pass catching involvement for running backs against them. In week 1, we saw Rex Burkhead get 8 targets against this Colts team for 5 receptions and 30 yards. Not too bad there. And Travis Etienne on 3 receptions averaged 11 yards per reception in week 2's game last week. He got all 3 of his 3 targets for 33 yards. So There has been some relative success for running backs out of the backfield here in the first couple of games. Again, we're not expecting him to be entirely dependent on this phase of things, though. He has done some nice things on the ground in terms of his rushing ability. He's sprung a few here and there. He's not, the most, elite. He's definitely not a workhorse running back, but he's not obviously your best option in the world. However, I do like him in this game. The Colts have had some, moderate levels of success allowed to other pass-catching running backs out of the backfield. And if I've seen anything from this Chiefs offense this season, it's that Andy Reid freaking loves CEH on opening scripted drives for teams. If you didn't know, teams will basically prepare like 15 to 20 plays every single week that they want to lean on, and basically that's their set calls for the start of a game. They'll chart things that work, things that don't. They'll evolve their game plan throughout the evolution and progression of that game script, and CEH is super involved in those game scripts every week. When things become a little bit more off the cuff and Patrick Mahomes is improvising a bit more, we don't see the football head his way as much, as many play calls directed towards Clyde's way. But on those opening possessions, running back screens, flipping him out the ball in space in the flats, they're using him more of the way they should have when they drafted him here, and this proper usage makes me like him more, again, especially in this Colts matchup, which has had some success to pass-catching backs out of the backfield. And then finally here, this is no hot take. This is nothing that's, groundbreaking, sound the alarms, awesome news announcement here. But this is for those of you that had Leonard Fournette last week and were extremely disappointed and now might be becoming a bit scared in terms of his outlook here. He hasn't necessarily performed up to par. This isn't a player that's found the end zone yet this season, and this is a football player that you drafted to possibly be your team's top running back on your roster. Maybe he's a high-level running back too that you're worried is on the verge of busting here this season. I don't think that's the case. It's been a shockingly maybe not even so much shockingly, but it's just been a slow and sluggish start for this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. We saw them in week 1 stall out in the red zone frequently against the Cowboys, settle for a lot of field goals. And then week 2 is that dreaded Saints matchup where Lenny got his touches on the ground but wasn't super efficient. So I think he gets back on track here against a Packers team that, again, allowed over 8 yards per carry against the Chicago Bears and David Montgomery in week 2. Fournette also has only 6 targets on the season through 2 games, yes, but that's 50% less than what he averaged last year at 6 targets per game. So you're walking into a matchup, possibly, worst case scenario, they could be without Mike Evans due to suspension, Julio if his injury isn't healed yet, and then Chris Godwin due to injury as well with the hamstring. Fournette might be your best playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. So they might be getting him the ball a lot in the screen game here, obviously in the passing game out of the backfield, and they might be just slugging that ball out with him here in the rushing phase of things as well. So I'm definitely not worried about Leonard Fournette. I could easily see him carving up the Packers. Their run defense is really hit or miss. They allowed 90 yards to Dalvin Cook in week 1, so don't panic on Leonard Fournette. That's the message of having him here in this video. Like I talked about at the top of things here, the running back position is looking very sparse and scarce here already in just week 3. You're seeing guys, whether it's situations play out negatively or outlook's just not looking very solid here. This was the guy that I felt was kind of on the cusp of being a little bit of a worrisome player for some people. So I just wanted to talk about him here for this week. So thank you guys so much for watching. Of course, if you enjoyed, smash that like button. Let me know your questions down in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video. We've got 3 other lineup segments out for today. Peace out.